As a former athlete and longtime sports fan, I just have to set some things straight. I refuse to watch the NBA with Black Lives Matter written across the court in big, black, bold letters. I also refuse to watch any sports where taking a knee during the national anthem is the new norm. In this video, I'm going to break down why so many sports fans have tuned out, as well as why so many people who aren't very political don't understand why we've stopped watching. Let's start with Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Neither of those statements alone are all that offensive. Black lives do matter, just like all lives matter. In fact, most people who say all lives matter are including black lives. They're agreeing that black lives matter and making the tent bigger by stating that all lives matter, not just black lives. People who are offended by it feel that blacks are getting a raw deal in America, so when you reply that all lives matter, they feel like you're ignoring that blacks are being treated unfairly compared to everyone else. You see, on its face, all lives matter is not offensive, but as a reply to Black Lives Matter, they feel the statement discounts the experiences that blacks have, and thus it takes on a different meaning. But that's also the case with the phrase Black Lives Matter. On its face, it's not objectionable. But if I'm a person or a cop who treats everyone the same, no matter their race, then the statement means that I'm a liar and that I'm somehow guilty of being a racist. So maybe I'll agree that Black Lives Matter by saying, yeah, I believe that Black Lives Matter because I believe that all lives matter. And then around and around we go. Now, let's go back to when this really became an issue in sports. Colin Kaepernick decided to kneel during the national anthem in protest of what he said was police brutality. But his words and his actions didn't match up. He told us that it wasn't about the flag or the military or America, but he told us that while he was wearing a t-shirt with the communist dictator Fidel Castro on it. If he was protesting police brutality and not America, he wouldn't wear a shirt that celebrates the most infamous communist tyrant of the Western Hemisphere. The shirt had pictures of a meeting that took place in the 1960s between Castro and Malcolm X, Black Power and communism. And back in those days, Black Power types and communists worked together to create civil unrest in the hopes for a revolution, and in training for the revolution. These people were seen as radical and dangerous, which is a lot different than today. BLM and Antifa are just as radical as the revolutionaries back then, but they get a pass. They have a lot more influence in society now and a lot more people who openly support them. They've even been accepted as a legitimate voice among the Democrat Party. Just imagine for a second that what's been going on in Portland the past 2 months was done by white supremacists or the KKK. Not only would we see it on the news every night, it would be condemned by everyone. Of course, the leftist media would somehow try to blame Trump and the Republicans for it, but that's just par for the course. What we're seeing today with Antifa and Black Lives Matter is a coordinated effort to undermine our way of life and create a revolution. The shirt that Kaepernick wore was in celebration of a time when communists had overthrown the Cuban government and shortly thereafter joined forces with the Black Power movement to try to start a revolution here in America in the 1960s.
Thousands of rioters joined in the assaults with clubs and bricks and Molotov cocktails. Louis Lomax, prominent Negro journalist who covered the Detroit riots and investigated their causes, wrote in the Detroit News that forces from outside Detroit sent squads of college-age Black Power agents into the city's Negro community 30 days ahead of the riots to agitate Negroes and create an explosive atmosphere. They posed as magazine salesmen, Mr. Lomax reported. Al Dunmore, the respected editor of Detroit's Negro newspaper, the Michigan Chronicle, was interviewed.
Do you feel that there's any pattern or any conspiracy behind the riots that we've had in our major cities this year?
I really feel that there is an organized conspiracy which is both national and has some international involvement. I feel this. And I have reasons to be almost certain.
In 1967, 126 cities were hit by racial violence, with 75 incidents classified as major riots. At least 117 persons were killed, more than 2,000 injured. Total cost, including property damage and other economic losses, $665 million. Was this massive exercise in anarchy a rehearsal for civil war and revolution? H. Rap Brown, national chairman of the Revolutionary Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, confirms the reality of revolution. Here he is speaking at the height of the 1967 race riots, in film footage not hitherto seen by the American public.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers. Masses of our people are in the streets. They're fighting tit for tat, tooth for tooth, an eye for an eye and a life for a life. The rebellions that we see are merely dress rehearsals for the revolution that's to come. We better get ourselves some guns and prepare ourselves.
Stokely Carmichael, the new messiah of revolutionary black power, boldly sets forth the objective.
This struggle is not a reformist movement which aspires to become a part of the United States. It is a struggle of total revolution.
For more than 35 years, international communism, whose historic goal is the overthrow of the United States and the seizure of dictatorial dominion over all mankind, has been working among minority groups in America, particularly at Negro Americans, Puerto Rican Americans, and Mexican Americans.
The fact is, most professional athletes are unaware that the BLM movement is about much more than just the phrase Black Lives Matter. It's a political movement. It's an ideological movement. And that's a big reason why so many of us have tuned out. Just like the 1960s, BLM has teamed up with communists in pursuit of their Marxist agenda. In fact, the people who started Black Lives Matter are trained Marxists.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Marxism is the philosophy that communism is built on. And Karl Marx, the father of communism, said that socialism is the first necessary phase on the way from capitalism to communism. And a lot of people who were rioting in the streets recently were doing it in the hopes of creating a revolution. They want to bring down capitalism and start heading in the direction of communism. That's what the BLM movement is about. They don't actually care about black lives. You see, Democrats and the left have been using black people to further their agenda for the past 200 years. First, they were the party of slavery. Then they were the party of the KKK. Then they were the party of Jim Crow. They've been taking advantage of black people ever since the party's inception. And that's still what's happening today. In 1981, Michael Donald was the last black person lynched by the Klan in Alabama. And 2 years after that, Alabama elected George Wallace to be governor again. When he was elected the first time in 1963, in his inaugural speech, he infamously cried,
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
And that ended up being a rallying cry for all the people who were against the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The Democrats tell this fantastic story about how racists switched parties after the civil rights era, but that never happened, as we saw with Wallace being elected as a Democrat again in the 1980s. And isn't it interesting that the Crime Bill of 1994, which is partly blamed for the mass incarceration of black men, was written by then Senator Joe Biden, who is now the Democratic nominee for president. And it doesn't matter that President Trump championed prison reform legislation that changed what so many say Joe Biden got wrong back in 1994. BLM is still all in with Biden and the Democrats. Look, the reason I've stopped watching the NBA is because I do think Black Lives Matter. I don't agree with blacks being used by the far left to push their Marxist agenda. A week and a half ago, I told a friend of mine that a lot of sports fans are going to be tuning out. He called me a week later and said that they were talking about this very issue on ESPN all day that day. And what they were saying is that if you refuse to watch basketball because Black Lives Matter is written on the court, then they don't care because it's your problem that you're uncomfortable with the phrase Black Lives Matter. But the thing is, regular Americans, and especially sports fans, do believe that Black Lives Matter, or we wouldn't be sports fans. We couldn't be. Our problem is that the movement does not care about black lives. They care so little that they're willing to stand on the graves of black people to further their political agenda. And if the people in the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball don't see that, well, I don't care. It's their problem that they're so ignorant. And their ignorance doesn't end there. According to mappingpoliceviolence.org, in 2019, 28 unarmed blacks were killed by the police. 51 unarmed whites were also killed by the police. And the reason you can't name one unarmed white person who was killed by the police last year is because there is nothing that can be gained politically by exploiting their tragic death. If this was just about police brutality, you wouldn't hear anyone disagreeing with it. And that's including the police. There are bad police officers. There are incompetent police officers. And there are racist police officers. But the majority are doing a good job and making our country a better place. And that majority wants the bad cops and the racist cops to be fired. And they want the incompetent cops to be better trained. And the majority of cops never want to be in a situation where they have to take the life of another human being. I got a friend who's LAPD. Last year I asked him how things were going, and he said that he almost had to shoot a person. Someone drew a knife on him and was about 10 feet away, threatening him and his partner with it. He said that if they would have charged him, he would have had to shoot him. Then he said, that would have probably ended my career. You see, he's Hispanic and the offender was black. That's the reality that Black Lives Matter is creating. An atmosphere where a cop is afraid to do his job correctly if a black person attacks him with a lethal weapon. He has to decide between trying to survive a knife attack so he doesn't lose his job or killing a black person who's trying to kill him. Writer, actor, producer, and director Tyler Perry was asked recently on CNN if he is optimistic after seeing all of these protests. Here's what he said.
I was very optimistic. I was very optimistic at the horror of what happened after the death of George Floyd. I became optimistic when I saw so many people get it. It was the same thing that happens during the Civil Rights Movement when people saw on television that what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, what happened with Bull Connor, what happened in all of these moments. When people saw it, when white people saw it, they got engaged, they wanted to help. So when they saw George Floyd's death, this horrific, horrible death played out, as this man pleaded for his life and begged, said please many, many times, seeing it changes everything. So I became very, very optimistic when everybody galvanized together, because I know that's when change comes, when people galvanize and come together as one. That's when change happens. But lately I've been very, very concerned that the message is being hijacked by some other groups or political ads and parties that are trying to stop the message of what we're asking for here is police reform. Right? So, yeah, I was, but I'm worried now is because of what I'm seeing.
Mr. Perry has it partly right. The movement has been hijacked, but it's been that way for a long time. We were all galvanized after seeing the video of George Floyd, and we all want justice for Mr. Floyd. Where Perry gets it wrong is that the protests were never about what happened to George Floyd, and they've never been about Black Lives Mattering either. It's a Marxist movement that uses the downtrodden to create civil unrest with the goal of taking down capitalism and pushing this country further and further to the left. A lot of sports fans aren't coming back because they use sports as an escape from the stress of politics. And whether it was done in ignorance or not, the NBA has sided with the far left, helping them to shove their message down our throats while they think they're conveniently perched upon a pedestal of virtue. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, quote, "Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." And that, my friends, is the simple truth. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to become a supporting member of Blue Collar Logic, click on the link in the description and give what you can.
Earphone protection so that you can sleep all at night. Join now in this.
They've been grown by specialists. Today, anyone can enjoy these.
So what are you going to do today?
I really want to get that garage organized.
I just want to relax. Just hang out.
Oh, sports are back on.
Oh, you know what? On second thought, let's just go clean that garage.